Welcome to this explainer. When we look at the chaotic, intricate machinery of global financial markets, it's pretty easy to just get lost in the scrolling tickers. But how do we truly measure an exchange's underlying stability? Today, we're moving right past those flashing red and green numbers to examine the absolute core of financial sustainability data.
So let's start with a really fundamental question. When you've got a multi-trillion-dollar ecosystem processing literally billions of transactions, how do we, whether we're investors, regulators, or just curious observers, actually figure out if the system is healthy or if it's teetering on the brink of failure?
Because here's the thing, raw data alone doesn't tell the whole story. If an exchange reports multiple trading halts, a couple of flash crashes, or even data breaches, well, that sounds alarming, right? But those raw symptoms are actually pretty misleading unless you have a baseline to diagnose the patient. You literally can't evaluate the severity of a symptom without knowing the size and scale of the organism. We need vital signs.
Real quick, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting measuring a market's health, the pulse, activity metrics, normalizing the raw data, transparency and efficient markets, managing tech and continuity, and finally, the true value of data.
All right, Section 1, measuring a market's health, setting the standard.
What we're focusing on here is absolutely crucial. The SASB standards, which are now part of the IFRS Foundation, basically act as the ultimate health check framework for security and commodity exchanges. These standards lay out the exact metrics that entities need to report so we can accurately evaluate risks like information asymmetry, tech failures, and market manipulation. But before we can even begin to look at those risks, we have to establish our baseline.
Which brings us to Section 2, the pulse, activity metrics, finding the baseline.
To understand any of the complex risks an exchange faces, we first need to find its pulse. And our first primary activity metric, which is labeled FNX000A, by the way, is the average daily number of trades executed, and that's categorized by product or asset class. This tells us exactly how busy the exchange is on a day-to-day basis. I mean, are we talking 1,000 trades or 10 million?
And by defining that alongside our second vital metric, the average daily volume traded in the presentation currency, we truly establish the foundational scale of the exchange. Look, these activity metrics aren't just trivia. They are quantitative measures of scale. They act as the lens through which literally every other piece of sustainability data has to be viewed.
Let's move right into Section 3, normalizing the raw data, diagnosing the patient.
So let's see how this pulse actually builds our diagnostic capability. This scenario perfectly illustrates why raw numbers can be so deceiving. Just imagine Exchange A reports 50 trading halts in a year, and Exchange B reports only 5. On the surface, Exchange A sounds terrible, doesn't it? But what if Exchange A executes 10 million trades a day, and Exchange B only executes 10,000? By normalizing the data, basically putting those 50 halts into the context of those massive daily trade volumes, we get a true apples-to-apples rate of disruption.
Moving on to Section 4, transparency and efficient markets, managing the flow. Now that we have our pulse, let's examine our first set of symptoms regarding market efficiency. Security and commodity exchanges have this massive responsibility to prevent information asymmetries, which is basically making sure nobody gets an unfair advantage. And to do this, they frequently have to suspend trading. A full halt might happen so the market can digest a major corporate merger or a big legal development, while a shorter pause might just be to cool off erratic trading or extreme volatility.
Furthermore, we have to look at how these trades are actually happening. A huge portion of modern market activity is completely driven by automated and high-frequency trading algorithms. We're talking about pre-programmed instructions executing across public exchanges and dark pools at absolute lightning speed. Now, this automation brings great opportunities like increased volume for sure, but it also introduces massive volatility risks.
So, how does our pulse, those activity metrics, change how we view this automation and these market halts? Well, if an exchange tells us that 60% of its trades are automated, that percentage only carries real weight when we multiply it by the average daily volume traded. That math gives us the actual hard financial exposure the exchange has to algorithmic risks.
Section 5, managing tech and continuity, surviving disruptions.
Let's look at another set of symptoms where scale is quite literally everything. Technology risks. Modern exchanges are hyper-reliant on IT. When significant market disruptions happen, meaning the exchange literally stops functioning normally and threatens steep market declines, it's usually due to cyber attacks, hardware failures, or those algorithmic flash crashes.
Exchanges measure this damage by tracking the number of incidents and the total hours of downtime.
In a similar vein, exchanges are obviously prime targets for data breaches, but the standards require them to get highly specific here. They must carefully identify the percentage of breaches that actually compromise the identifiable personal data of living customers as opposed to just general corporate data. They even have to track if encrypted data was compromised alongside its encryption key. Once again, we must ask the fundamental question: how do the activity metrics change our understanding of these technological vulnerabilities? Think about it. 3 hours of downtime for a small regional commodity exchange? That's an inconvenience. 3 hours of downtime for an exchange with an average daily volume in the hundreds of billions? That is a catastrophic global financial event. The activity metric is the multiplier that defines the true risk.
Section 6. The true value of data. Empowering the observer. And this brings us to the core takeaway of our entire explainer. Whether we're looking at the hours of downtime from a cyber attack, the number of customers affected by a personal data breach, or even monetary losses from antitrust and market manipulation lawsuits, raw numbers are effectively meaningless in a vacuum. Applying the average daily number of trades and the average daily volume reveals the true proportional health of the exchange. Normalization provides proportion. It's really that simple.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought. The next time you see a terrifying headline about a market disruption, a flash crash, or a massive regulatory fine leveled against an exchange, ask yourself, are you just looking at the raw, sensational symptoms, or have you actually checked the patient's pulse? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the right questions.